Last fall, a young woman named Jenna booked a weekend getaway in Boise to decompress after a rough breakup. It was a charming basement apartment, cozy, affordable, and in a quiet neighborhood. The reviews were all positive, though one mentioned something vague about odd architecture. When she arrived, the place looked even better than the photos. Spotless, warm lighting, even a little welcome basket with snacks and a handwritten note. But something felt off. There were 5 deadbolts on the front door, all from the inside. Strange, but maybe the host was just overly cautious. That night, Jenna kept waking up every hour feeling like she wasn't alone. At around 3 a.m., she heard a strange sound, a dragging, scraping noise. It was coming from the wall behind the bed. She turned on her phone's flashlight and followed the sound. Her hand brushed against a portion of the wall that felt softer than the rest. Tapping it, she realized it was hollow. The next morning, she pushed the bed aside and found a nearly invisible seam in the wall, a hidden door. She messaged the host, asking if the door was part of the rental. No response. Curiosity got the better of her. She pried it open. Inside was a narrow tunnel-like room filled with cobwebs, a single broken chair, and an old radio still plugged in. The worst part, there were fresh footprints in the dust on the floor, and they led toward the bed. She packed her things and left without waiting for a refund. Later that week, she checked the listing again. It was gone. A guy named Marcus was doing a solo road trip down the East Coast. He booked a few nights in Savannah at a small guest house behind a larger plantation-style home. His host, a man named Grant, greeted him when he arrived. Tall, wiry, quiet. Something about him seemed off. But Marcus chalked it up to Southern hospitality being a little quirky. The first night was uneventful. The guest house was rustic but clean. But the next morning, Marcus woke up to a cleaning lady already inside, scrubbing the kitchen sink. He hadn't heard her come in. She was old, silent, and never made eye contact. He asked her when she arrived. She didn't answer, just smiled, toothless, and kept scrubbing. Later that day, Marcus asked Grant about the woman. He looked confused and said, "I don't have a cleaner." When they checked the guest house together, she was gone. Not a trace. That night, Marcus bolted the doors and windows. At 2 a.m., he was awoken by the sound of running water. He crept to the kitchen, and there she was again, the old woman, washing dishes that weren't there. He backed away and slammed the door shut. When he opened it again, the kitchen was empty. Marcus left that morning. On his way out, he saw something that still haunts him. On the side of the main house, faint, faded, was a missing person poster. The face, identical to the old woman. She'd been dead for over 30 years. Oregon Nick and his girlfriend were in Ashland for the Shakespeare Festival. They'd rented a picturesque Airbnb cabin in the woods. No neighbors, no reception. Pure quiet. The host was an older woman named Sharon, who lived in the main house about 100 yards away. She greeted them, gave a few rules, and mentioned, "Just don't stay past checkout." Please. Odd, but whatever. They spent a peaceful weekend hiking and reading in the hammock. On the last night, they decided to sleep in a bit and check out late, figuring Sharon wouldn't mind an extra hour. That's when everything changed. At exactly 11:01 a.m., they heard the front door creak open. They thought it was Sharon, but the person walking in wasn't her. It was a man in a dusty flannel jacket, face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't speak. He just stood in the hallway, holding what looked like an old-fashioned hotel key on a rusted ring. He pointed at them, then at the clock. Then he vanished down the hall. They sprinted to pack their things and raced out the door. As they drove away, they looked back and saw Sharon standing at the window of her main house, not waving, just watching. Later that night, Sharon sent them a message. "Thank you for leaving on time. He doesn't like it when guests overstay." They never replied. And that listing, still up, still 5 stars. I booked a small Airbnb in Arizona for a weekend trip with my boyfriend. It was a cheap, modern-style home in the middle of the desert, totally remote. The photos made it look serene and peaceful. The host had great reviews, and I figured it'd be a perfect weekend getaway to disconnect and stargaze. The house itself was just 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, an open living room, and a kitchen. But there was one weird thing mentioned in the listing. A small back room was locked and not accessible to guests. That part gave me an uneasy feeling, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was a supply closet or utility room. We arrived Friday night. Everything looked exactly as pictured. Clean, simple, minimal. But from the moment we got inside, it felt off. It was almost too quiet. No wildlife noises, no wind, just this heavy, static silence. The weirdness really started that night. Around 2:30 a.m., we were asleep in the main bedroom when a loud knock echoed from the back of the house. We both sat up. I thought it was maybe a window, but the knock came again, this time louder. We walked through the house and realized it was coming from inside, from behind the locked door. I called out, "Hello," thinking maybe the host kept a pet back there or something. No answer. But then the knocking stopped, only to start again 5 minutes later. Except now, it sounded like scratching. We debated calling the host, but something in my gut told me not to. I decided to check the door. I pressed my ear against it, and I swear I heard breathing, slow, raspy breathing, like someone was on the other side, listening too. We ended up sleeping in the car that night. The next day, we packed up and left. The host never answered my messages, and when I went back to the listing to report what happened, it was gone, completely removed from Airbnb. To this day, I still don't know what was behind that door, but I have a feeling someone or something was locked inside. This was about 2 years ago. I was in upstate New York visiting some old college friends. I booked a cheap Airbnb just outside a small town, old farmhouse style, totally isolated. It had a weird charm to it, and honestly, I just needed a place to crash for the weekend. When I arrived, the host wasn't there, but he left a key under the mat. The inside was old but cozy, antique furniture, creaky floors, and shelves full of dusty books and vintage trinkets. Pretty normal, except for one thing. In the back hallway, there was a door labeled "Storage, Do Not Open." Of course, that only made me more curious. I tried the knob. It was locked tight. No big deal, I figured. Later that night, after coming back from dinner with friends, I noticed something strange. A faint humming sound. It was coming from that storage room, almost like a generator or some kind of machine. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear something turning, clicking, whirring. Then, at exactly midnight, the noise stopped. Dead silence. I decided to go to bed, but around 3 a.m. I woke up to this distant banging, like someone slamming a metal object against concrete. It was muffled, but rhythmic. Again, it came from the locked door. At this point, I was freaked out enough to start recording with my phone. I crept down the hallway, and I swear I saw a light coming from under the door, flickering, almost like a strobe. I booked it back to my room and locked the door. The next morning, I was ready to leave early. As I passed by that locked door one last time, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Scratch marks on the floor around the base of the door. Deep, frenzied claw marks, like someone or something had tried to dig their way out. When I got home, I reported it to Airbnb, and the listing eventually vanished. I don't know what was behind that door, but I still have the audio from that night. The humming, the banging. And when you play it back at full volume, you can just barely hear a voice whispering behind the noise.